Things are changing so fast that if we wait for regulations, we wait for the government, the state organizations, Chesterfield County, Henrico County, whatever, to tell us what the right thing is, we're going to be waiting for decades probably. It took us 50 years and 7,000 research articles before the Surgeon General of the United States said smoking causes cancer, right? Glacial pace. And so my focus is on educating people.
Today in the Virginia Consumer Podcast, we are joined by triple board certified doctor and founder of Richmond Integrative and Functional Medicine, Dr. Aaron Hartman. He is an assistant clinical professor at VCU, a clinician researcher who's led dozens of trials, and his practice focuses on root cause evidence-based care for complex chronic conditions. Today's conversation is for educational purposes only, not medical advice. So I'm starting to notice that there may be a connection between new home construction and PANS diagnoses. Do you find that you're seeing an increase in your practice overall, or is that even a possibility?
What's interesting when you go to and talk to people that do PANS, which is a neuroinflammatory condition, there's these places where a lot of patients come from. I think all the kids got sick and they went back to school in the fall because they all were spreading viruses around. You start talking to teachers, all the teachers get sick the week before school starts when they go back, and you realize maybe it's the building.
We are happy to introduce Dr. Aaron Hartman. He came highly recommended a few times from a few different people that I've met. And since we're in the Midlothian area, I thought it would be good to have him on. He's got a unique perspective. And I know that he has a very personal story that got him started on the path to integrative and functional medicine. So Dr. Hartman, would you like to give us a little bit of a background on who you are and the spark to your practice?
The spark. Great to be with you today. Super excited to be here. So like a little bit about myself. I'm a triple board certified medical physician. Went to the Medical College of Virginia here in Richmond. I started a clinical research company at Virginia Research Center maybe 15 years ago. Did a bunch of clinical trials. I'm also assistant clinical professor at the local college at the VCU School of Medicine. So I have a lot of different hats that I wear. But what really got me down this pathway of looking at health different was my daughter, Anna. My wife, who actually is a pediatric occupational therapist, which works with kids with special needs. One of her patients was losing their home, which later became my daughter, Anna. And we brought her into our house and thought we were just going to do the right thing, take care of her, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the first encounters with the healthcare system we had was with her GI doctor, who was, hey, this child's too small. Failure to thrive was the word they used. Let's put a plastic tube, a feeding tube in her belly and throw some formula, some sugar, water down it. And just, that's what we're supposed to do. And so my wife, who worked with these kids, was like, hey, this is why this is a bad idea. This affects speech. It affects crawling. It affects neuromuscular development, all kinds of stuff. But the system really had low expectations of my daughter that she was never supposed to walk. She was never supposed to talk or crawl. They really didn't have a whole lot of hope. So for them, they just wanted her to gain weight and get in the middle of that chart. So after consulting with my wife, we opted not to do that. And there are really two big inflection points with my career. The first one was the response of the GI doctor for wanting to do the best thing for my future daughter at that point in time and saying, hey, we're going to travel this hard road of trying to make this little girl eat. We were reported to Child Protective Services because we refused to put a feeding tube in my daughter.
Wow.
And that was the first inflection point. I was like, wow, the system doesn't like it when you say no. The second was 6 months later when my wife, and we're always doing research for stuff that's just kind of, we have a strange relationship where people listen to our conversations and they're like, do you all ever like not talk about business and medical stuff? And so 6 months later, she actually found a chart with kids with cerebral palsy, which is the official diagnosis for my daughter. And she was in the middle of the growth chart. And so the second inflection point was the specialist had no idea that there was this growth chart for my daughter, in which she's actually typical for this. And they're going to do a surgical procedure that she didn't even need. And so the second inflection point was the specialists, maybe they don't know. I mean, if they don't know something as basic as a growth chart for at that point in time, a 14-month-old little girl, what else do they not know? And so that planted the seeds of doubt in my mind. Like, I need to become my daughter's expert and I need to figure her out. And that over years of research and stuff led to me getting 2 additional board certifications, one in integrative and holistic medicine, one in anti-aging, regenerative, and metabolic medicine, and then a bunch of other certifications, and eventually starting my practice, which is Richmond Integrative and Functional Medicine. So I've got an interesting background academically, but the inflection point actually revolved around my family, which, interestingly enough, in the integrative and functional medicine world, usually there's a close loved one, a family member who has a bizarre, weird, atypical diagnosis, and they go down these paths, and they realize there's a whole different world out there, and there's so much you can do um, that's not acknowledged by our current healthcare system.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. That's very similar to our story in that we had some kids with some atypical symptoms, signs, things biologically. And it's interesting how little doctors spend re-educating themselves, like spending the time to learn the new techniques and the new findings, going through research to open up their minds. It's almost like they get in a rut and they start to follow the same line of thinking, and then you need to follow that line of thinking too. You're not allowed to change it up and try new things and try alternative medicine because it almost becomes like your anti medicine.
Well, I think what happens is we kind of, it's really weird. You're in college and you realize you have a goal to go to medical school. So you study and learn medical school. You get in your residency, and every month, literally for 3 years, every month I'd go into a new specialty clinic and have to learn something new. And so you're used to learning new things and expand your knowledge base. But there's something weird. Once you get that board certification, it's like I've arrived. Aha, I'm there. And people literally will just stop their educational process and do the bare minimum to maintain that board certification, which is not doesn't take much to do that. And so, but the reality is, when you get to that stage, you finish your residency, you've got your board certification, whatever. That's just the ticket to entry. That's your aha. Now you can start practicing medicine, which is a practice. And I feel like that understanding that the reality of how I educate myself and my mindset is atypical, because the way the system is set up, aha, now you're board certified. Now you can relax and start your career, which is usually building a business of some sort. But there's not the idea that, you know what, you don't really know you okay, great, you're new, you got the ticket to the party, welcome in, but you don't really know what you're doing. And it took several years for me to kind of learn that. I was in the military, served overseas, came back here, worked at St. Francis for as a hospice for our practice and our patients for maybe 15 years. And it took me about 8 years to get really comfortable seeing hospitalized patients in the ICU, admitting them through the ER when we were still doing that. And I feel like that stretching myself continually got me in the habit of always looking for new things to learn. And then my daughter, obviously, and then my patients, my practice became a functional medicine practice. I'm collecting all these people that have been to 7 and 8 specialists and been to UVA and MCV and Duke and Mayo and whatever the fancy place is with diagnosis of psychiatric illnesses or
Right.
whatever. And it's like, no, you actually have mold illness, you have Lyme, your kid has pandas and pans, this is a mold related. And so um I'm at the stage of my career now after 25 years, and I'm like, you know what, I'm still learning. And so if I tell patients routinely, if I tell you the same thing 3 to 6 months ago, I mean 3 to 6 months from now that I told you, in the past, then you need to find another doctor, because I stopped learning new things. And so like, that's a new thing I say to people, because it's literally month to month I'm learning new things that are changing how I practice medicine, which is not the standard of medical practice currently in our country.
And we are biological organisms too, so we're always changing. I think environmental toxins, our lifestyle, stress levels can change how you're feeling day to day. So if you're not looking at the person as this moving target, like how do we keep you your most healthy every day? It becomes a challenge to like really stay connected with your physicians. And I know with our daughter, what we first started noticing were these ticks that started to happen all of a sudden. And we were told it's nothing, it'll pass, or maybe it's a reaction to strep, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And we got the PANS diagnosis. But in our community, we've got a really high number of PANS diagnoses. It's off the charts. So I'm starting to notice that there may be a connection between new home construction and PANS diagnoses. Do you find that you're seeing an increase in your practice overall, or is that
Yeah.
even a possibility?
What's interesting when you go to and talk to people that do pandas, which is a neuroinflammatory condition, there's these places where a lot of patients come from. There's a couple centers around the country, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're from Richmond. We have tons of patients from there." And you start asking yourself, "Why is Richmond? Why is Central Virginia unique?" And having traveled around the country a lot, researched a lot, when I was doing my in pandas, and PANS is a type of chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So that is just a fancy way of saying that one part of our immune system, which is our more ancient innate immune system, becomes dysregulated, uncontrolled, and starts going kind of bonkers. And there's a bunch of different illnesses related to that, but this PANS is one of the ones. And so you have to start thinking about, and it comes to the world of biotoxins. And so when you talk about, mold is one of many, many biotoxins. The idea of mold is a little bit of a misnomer. To be honest with you, it's the better term is a water damaged building. If you have a water damaged building, there are hundreds of particulates, um, pieces of sugar molecules made by different bacteria, endotoxins, actinomyces that are in a building. 80% of it actually is not mold that related to SIRS. It's actinomyces and endotoxins. And so if you see visible mold, which accounts for about 18% of SIRS, then you've got all the other buddies coming along. And I feel like that's a little bit of a misnomer. But as far as like why Richmond, Virginia, I've asked myself that question a lot. What's unique about this environment? Because I collect patients from different places in the country, different schools, actually different schools in Richmond. Certain schools I see more kids from, for for health issues. If you kind of remember, I was practicing here back in the what was it, 2000, late 2000s, maybe 2010, when we had the whole Legionella thing going on in Chesterfield County. I don't know if y'all remember that.
No, we
And
weren't here yet.
oh, okay, well, there was an issue with it. Okay, we're here yet. So one of my patients happened to run the buildings for the Chesterfield County. So started talking to them, and come to find out, they have these water coolers on the roof. That's a cheaper way to run air conditioning that uses water, and they all have Legionella and different bacteria and biofilms in them. And then the schools themselves will turn off or turn back the air conditioners in the summertime, so that all summer long they're not running. I used to think all the kids got sick and they went back to school in the fall because they all were spreading viruses around. You start talking to teachers, all the teachers get sick the week before school starts when they go back, and you realize maybe it's the building. And then, oh, by the way, for cost reasons, they cut back the air condition in the afternoons, like 4 o'clock, and they don't really cut it back on until the morning. So we've literally created these swamp boxes. And what do you expect? We expect kids to be exposed to lots of biotoxins. But again, that doesn't really speak to the whole Richmond thing, which was your original question. I have a theory about that. And my theory is when I was studying about mold related illness, one of the journeys, part of my research, took me into looking into the concept of endotoxins, which are um, the toxins made by bacteria that are in the air. And then over in Europe, in cities, they actually measure the endotoxins in the air. It's a part of industrial medicine over there. You start realizing that in certain countries, they realize the stuff is in the air from factories and things like that. So as I started thinking, well, how's that have to do with Richmond? And you start realizing Richmond's a big swamp. When you fly into Richmond, there's tons of stagnant water everywhere, and these endotoxins will grow in fresh water that's stagnant, which is one of the reasons why people feel better at beaches and the beaches, because you have more salt water, and that water is resistant to these kind of bacteria growing into it. So I think the building construction is a big part of it, obviously, but the environment is as well. If you live in at altitude, if you're from Park City, Utah, where the air's drier, and it's more moderate, you're going to grow less stuff in a building than you will in Richmond. And some people think, oh, I go to Arizona, it's dry there, but they don't realize that there's tons of mold there as well, because you have the air conditions on all year round, and they make the buildings tight there. And so it's really, building biology is a huge part of what I had to learn, but I also have to learn environmental medicine. And that's where also seeing people from around the country helps me learn about what kind of diseases come from certain parts of the country. So I think with Richmond, back to again your question, it's the buildings and the environment, and you have to deal with both of those really to deal with these kids' issues.
It really is a perfect storm. I
Yep.
never considered how turning off the air conditioners at the schools would affect the kids, but that makes perfect sense.
Well, one of the things that if you kind of take a deep dive into it, there's humidity in the air, and so if the humidity in the air is greater than 50%, and you have carpet, you'll grow dust mites and actually bacteria in carpet or furniture. If it's over 60%, you can grow it in the air in general. So in Richmond, it's hard in the summertime to keep the indoor humidity less than 60%, regardless of your environment. So that's one piece of it. And then there's obviously the building envelopes. There's air exchanges come into play. But it's really I love it. It's intriguing, but it's a mystery because you don't know with what the individual patient, the house they live in, how old's your house. I've had patients come to me, and this has been really interesting. Back in the '80s, they used to use masonite as an exterior for homes, which I'm like, why would you do that? But it was a thing. And one of my patients, actually, their house was masonite and it wasn't wrapped. And underneath the masonite, the whole outside of the house was surrounded in mold.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, how do you remediate that? I've had some patients who their homes had issues. I had a building biologist check out their homes, and they didn't have the wrap on it because now the way houses are built now, they're built with the expectation of an exterior vapor barrier, and somehow that made it through code and missed that. And so it's kind of complicated.
It is. It is. Go
I
ahead,
just
Marty.
want to say, yeah, this hasn't been that long that we've been talking, but what it creates the impression for me is there's no way that we have an adequate system, whether it's healthcare or construction or regulation, because the amount of taking a step back to look at the big picture, continue to learn, keep an open mind, and not tap out that you're describing that you're living is, I've got to think, incredibly rare. It would be so much easier to me if you made it through med school. Just as an example, you made it through med school, you got your boards, as you said, you do the minimum, and then you live the lifestyle because there's the economics of healthcare, but then there's also the healing of healthcare. And it sounds like to me that you're very much in pursuit for multiple reasons of that healing process. And that kind of pushes aside all of the economic barriers to what you may or may not do. And I think that's probably a big challenge to get people to think of it as healing as opposed to healthcare industry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my education, I've spent several $100,000 on my education after finishing my first board certification. So it's been a big financial investment on my part. When I learn a new thing, and I try it out myself first, my family first. So I've put a lot of personal finances into this, and obviously I was driven, you know, and you all, I mean, any parents out there with kids with health issues, or they get this, when you have your kids are sick, like there's nothing like a fire under you than if one of your kids is sick. And so that's what motivated me because I realized with my daughter, I'm like, she's young, her brain, she still can heal, she still has the healing potential, but I've got limited amount of time. I can't figure it out in 10 years or 15 years. I got to figure out like in the next 3 to 6 months. And so I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and just research stuff. And I'd started with um, crystal meth exposure because that was what she was exposed to initially. And there's not a lot of stuff about crystal meth exposure. And CP. So I had to go to the autism world and look at that research. And then and once you start learning things and applying them and seeing results, all of a sudden you get like, it's like that dopamine hit, right? It's almost like you get addicted to like, oh my gosh, this works. What else am I missing? And it's the fire that feeds itself. But that that inquisitiveness you're referring to, yeah, it's unfortunate that we kind of lose it. We get kind of when you get in the system and the system's like you guys see a patient every 10 minutes, it's really easy to kind of lose that curiosity that we all had when we were kids, that we hopefully had in medical school. You kind of I don't want to say it gets beat out of you, but it kind of sort of does.
Yeah, I mean, I have to see a doctor twice a year for thyroid, just blood test. And I mean, he spends a lot of time with me, but I think he's from another state, so I think he's frankly a little lonely. So he likes the conversations we have, honestly, because I think most of it is like what it strikes me is there's more of like I would attribute it in my world to like a project management task list, and not an amazing project management task list. So if you come in and you check certain boxes, they're going to run through a list with you. And that list is going to have to kind of, for the most part, solve your problem, point you in one direction or another, and you move on to the next person. Because again, and I'm not preaching here, it just seems like it's not primarily about healing.
It's the word healing is not a word we talk about in medical training. It's you talk about treating an illness, treating a disease. You come in with the symptoms, and we have to find the diagnosis, and then we use our protocols, which are you know based on the standard of care. Which what that means is a group of 10 specialists get together and decide what the lowest common denominator is. What do we all agree on? And once you realize the standard of care is not the highest bar, it's the lowest bar that people in the room agree with, then all of a sudden, like your thyroid testing you're referring to, like for me, it's standard thyroid panel is a TSH, free T4, free T3, reverse T3, and thyroid antibodies at a minimum, just to get an idea of what your body, what's your brain doing, what your hypothalamus saying to your pituitary, and then what your pituitary is saying to your thyroid. So your thyroid releases T4, and then what are your cells doing with T4? And your gut bacteria, probably 25% of T4 is converted to T3 by your gut bacteria. So if the ratio between those is off, I gotta look at your gut. And then what are your cells doing with your thyroid? That's the reverse T3. And so that for me, that's like the bare minimum if I'm looking at a basic thyroid thing. And our current standard of care is just a TSH, not the rest of that. And I've just, have struggled with how can I really manage someone's thyroid if I don't understand. And everything's like that. Everything has that added level of complexity that unless you take a dive into it, you really won't learn about it and learn about how to utilize or manipulate or concoct treatments that take into account your body's actual physiology, how it actually works.
It's so complex. And if we bring this back around just to kids, because they do have an amazing ability to heal
Yeah.
from all sorts of medical issues, it's almost like we are failing in that we're not combining doctors with regulation and construction and environments and getting some more input. Even if we discuss things um, in panels or just got some input before we pass laws regarding what we're going to use in buildings, because you've mentioned how Europe tests the air. They also don't allow you to put toxic elements into a building. I mean, baseline, the home is supposed to be your safe space. If we're not monitoring what is environmentally affecting the kids, we're doing a disservice. It's almost like we need more doctors involving themselves in regulatory process and offering more opinions and more consensus, maybe with AI even to cross-reference some more things. But how do you feel about regulation and getting involved in maybe offering some expertise?
And I struggle with that a little bit. If you asked me this question 5 years ago, I'd have given you a little bit different answer. If you ask me 5 years from now, I'll probably give you a different answer.
Hmm.
But where I fall at right now, I feel like the rate of change is too quick. You mentioned AI right now. I mean, that is things are changing so fast that if we wait for regulations, we wait for the government, the state organizations, Chesterfield County, Henrico County, whatever, to tell us what the right thing is, we're gonna be waiting for decades probably. The analogy I give people is that it took us 50 years and 7,000 research articles before the Surgeon General of the United States said smoking causes cancer, right? I mean, glacial pace. And so my focus is on educating people. I feel like the only way we're going to get fast changes at the appropriate rate is for people like you to educate people, for me to educate people. That's the reason I have a podcast. That's the reason I do my blogs. That's the reason why I have all these resources on my website. It's the reason why I've read over 400 books and put various book recommendations on my website for people that are interested in this because I personally feel like it has to be a bottom up, not a top down thing. And so my emphasis personally is on being the expert, but educating people like y'all, like my patients, like people wherever that they'll listen to me about taking charge of their health. Because with information changing so quickly, you really this and with AI and with all these tools out there, really for an individual, all the resource sources are there now for you to take charge of your health. Yes, you need a consultant, you need specialists, you need people to come alongside of you, but people really need to take charge. If you wait for the government to come along and say, "Hey, we're going to change code," then you're going to be waiting for a really, really long time. I mean, as it is now in Chesterfield County, if you put a conditioned crawl space, they still require you to put um, a hole in your floor so the crawl space can communicate with the house. And it's kind of like, how was that code? But it's code because it's code.
What they
The
did.
idea of an unencapsulated crawl space is a health hazard. They're still okay in the county. They're still okay in the state. You go to states in the United States, you go to Canada, they're not codes, not, but here they're still okay. They're cheaper. You can build a house cheaper. It's easier to access plumbing, but an unencapsulated crawl space. Think about this: 30% of the air in your house comes from your crawl space. This is the stacking effect. Air heats in your house, creates a vacuum, air is pulled in. And so the question becomes, is your crawl space a healthy place to be breathing air from? Because 30% of the air in your house is coming from that. And if it's unencapsulated, the answer is no. And so something as basic as that, if we've got that wrong, what else do we have wrong? So my personal focus is just to educate people to take charge of their health, to get their own healthcare team, to get their, you know, I like using the example of Lord of the Rings to get their Fellowship of the Rings together, get their motley crew together that can help them. Because the reality is that if you're waiting for these organizations, they do need to change. I'm not saying we shouldn't change food standards and we shouldn't remove petroleum chemicals. It's controversial to remove petroleum-based dyes from our food. Like, why is that controversial?
Right.
Why is it? But it is. And so I really think unless the glacial pace of government organizations, people really need to take charge. And I'm more into educating people so they can do that.
That makes me think. It just kind of shifted my whole thought process in terms of we've been really. I was very much a free market kind of guy. I grew up in kind of the public housing space and around welfare and programs. So my kind of sort of pseudo rebellion was to get away from that and to be very much a free market kind of get out of my face government kind of person, right? And then we're going through this litigation with our home and all the things we've seen. And then it's like, well, we need clear laws, we need clear rules, and we talk about deregulation. But I think that's more of a breakdown of the rule of law. But what you're describing to me, I think, is a better way to think about it because you're right. The regulation, yeah, they can be improved, obviously. But if we look to that as the authority, it's almost one, it's slow. Two, it's kind of lazy, and I think we've been lazy. It's almost like we're describing a holistic societal management. It's kind of what we're looking at, that big picture. We're looking at the schools. We're looking at how the mold comes in. We're looking at construction, all these pieces. But you're right. It's got to come from the bottom up. And that education and awareness idea, talking through the things that you just said, saying you need these aspects to be covered if you're building a home, or if you're sending your kid to a school, you need to know these things. I think that's enough of a concentration of people to where if 10 to 15, you don't need everybody. If 10 to 15% of the people shift their behavior because they're educated and aware, the market will shift
Yeah.
accordingly,
Well, let me ask you this because we are coming up to school again. So, knowing what we know about school buildings, what's your recommendation for people to kind of make themselves more bulletproof and to be able to have a more healthy school year start?
Well, I mean, I always like to start with the basic general information that the reality is we've all gone. I went to school. You all went to school. We were fine. Most people go to school and they're fine. So not to put people in the state of fright, like, oh my gosh, my kid's going to school. But if you have a child that's neurodivergent, that has a little ADD, a little ADHD, a little spectrumy, and these are the really bright, smart kids that become engineers and figure out how to turn little handheld devices into phones and all this kind of cool stuff. But those kids, the brains run a little fast, and so if you have one of those hypermobile children, which a lot of kids with panis and pans are hypermobile, part of the the issue with hypermobility is that it does make you a little more sensitive to environmental toxins and chemicals. So if you have one of those kids, then all of a sudden you have to have your radar a little higher. But from the average person, this it applies, but you shouldn't stress about it. But if you have a kid with a health issue, PANS, ADHD, dyslexia, POTS, dysautonomia, then all of a sudden environmental toxins can be a big trigger for the autonomic nervous system and their immune system. And so, it needs to be on your radar. So the things you can control are boosting your resilience through diet, through your home environment. When you look at 80% of Americans have magnesium deficiency. Depending on what literature you read, 90 to 100% of Americans have potassium deficiency. Um, 43% of Americans have a vitamin D deficiency. 20 to 40% of Americans have any single B vitamin deficiency. So all of a sudden now we have a population of nutrient deficient kids. Their omega-3 levels are off. And so if you go into school, into an environment or wherever, go to the military, you go to, traveling, whatever, um, and you go in with the wrong balance of fatty acids in your cells, nutrient deficient, then eating a high processed food diet, all of a sudden the environment's going to have a bigger negative impact on you. So what you can control is the diet at home. If you've had a kid with PANS or autism or just, whatever the diagnosis is. The experiment is eat a clean diet for a week, no sugar, no carbs, no dairy, yada, yada, yada. Then at the end of the week, or actually, this is the challenge. I think I'm gonna do this challenge this year on my social media. I'm gonna do like the the Halloween challenge the week before, like the month before Halloween, no sugar, right? And then after Halloween, give all the kids all the sugar they want and see what
Right.
happens, right? And they
I like
go
that idea.
and they go bonkers. And you gotta wonder, like, whoa, 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 what's going on? And so I think the home environment, what you do at home is more impactful than the schools themselves. Okay. It's just when we're seeing nutrient deficient, sleep deprived kids that have too much screen exposure is a neurostim it stimulates your brain. There's Jonathan Haidt, if you're familiar with his work. He wrote the book The Anxious Generation. He's written a bunch of really good books, but one of his The Anxious Generation, his more recent one, talks about why our kids are anxious. And part of that is when you have your brains are developing at an early age and they're wiring themselves and you're giving them screens during that critical developmental stage, you wire them to be dopamine seeking. It totally rewires the brains. And so having a better environment at home can make it so that when your kids go to school, the, you know, the fact that the air is not circulating that well, that they probably got some mold issues, the fact that, all the things that you've mentioned will not be as detrimental. But just being, Marty, to your point, a realist, how do we change the environment in school? How do we get them not to turn off the air condition, not to cut back the AC in the afternoons, or not to turn them off in the summertime? Or how do we get the teachers to put HEPA filters in all the kids' rooms? You know, that's a great policy question. I don't know, but what I do know is you can change your kid's diet. One of the things we're learning is that the bacteria in the child's gut, which makes 75% of all the child's neurotransmitters, 90% of serotonin, which is your happy neurotransmitter, 50% of dopamine, which is your ADD, ADHD neurotransmitter, is made in your GI tract. So all of a sudden, the environment of bacteria in your GI tract impacts how your environment affects the brain in that child. Those are all things you can control. So I like to focus on what people can control. I don't think seeing how we're responding to potential of fluoride being removed from the water and removing petroleum-based dyes from food, seeing how people are reacting with that. I don't think people are ready to like start getting schools to change how they build and how the ACs are
Right.
run. Even food, like the food in schools. It's like my kids the last 2 years have gone to 2 schools in Richmond that are specific for kids with dyslexia, and they have vending machines there filled full of processed food. And it's like y'all are experts with neurodivergent, brain inflamed kids, and you're giving them literally all of this bad stuff. And so that's education. That's we have to educate people. And what you control is the home. That's what you control. So I think the more resilient your home is, then your home has to be clean. The
Right.
better the diet is for the kids. For omega 3s, getting vitamin D levels, checking basic nutrient levels. I think that's the way you kind of address, from my perspective, the issue. Because the reality is, in the next, if your kids are in school in the next 4 years, are the schools going to change? Probably not. So, and then I think the third thing like that, Marty, you said is one of the things I learned early on in this thing is that if you vote with your dollars. When we started this journey, back in 2007, there was no organic, nothing. Whole Foods was not here in Richmond. Um, and my wife and I had to source absolutely everything. And so now you can actually get organic food. Why is that? Why does Walmart now carry organic food? Why is Kroger the largest, carrier of organic food in the country? It's because people demanded it with their dollars. So I think educating people and them using their dollars as a way to vote, that's how we're going to change. That's how stuff has changed in the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, we've learned. I should say we've learned. We've concluded that your most important vote is your dollar. And once you're a taxpayer, once you're kind of locked in, you're almost like a guaranteed source of resources. I had lunch with somebody yesterday who, you know, would say a different end of the political spectrum, uh, people with some significant resources. And we talked about the impact that they had when they met with a legislator and how he was surprised how essentially tone deaf they were to what they wanted and what they wanted in the neighborhood and the building requirements and all the development issues that they were about to take on. And I said to him, I said, listen, in our world, you're their base salary, but their donors are their commission. and they really are going to work hard to earn that commission. So if you understand that and you essentially work around that, and I'm not trying to take against the system. I'm just saying if you work around that and you act in your best interest and you educate other people to do the same, that's how the change will come. The conversation, the dialogue about what I'd like to have happen, it takes a lot of energy and time. But change, what you course correct, I think that's what forces the outcome. Um,
We
then
tend to
everything you're
work outside
describing,
the system, right?
yeah,
So that's kind of what this is all about. I want to get one last question in just because this is going long. Um, I want to ask you the difference because I know there were all these tests for mold. And it used to be that there was the P test, and then there's the blood test, and then there's you're either allergic to mold, you're not really responding to a mold sickness, or you have mold toxicity. Can you give a basic rundown? Like, what test would you
Uh,
do if you were trying to figure it out? And what's the difference between toxicity and allergy?
well, there's allergy is a part of your immune system, the Th2 part of the immune system that over responds to things in the environment that it shouldn't, like dust, dust mite allergies, hay fever, pollen, those kind of things. And so mold can elicit an allergic reaction like that. According to current literature, potentially 80% of adult asthma and 20% of childhood asthma, which those numbers kind of seem bizarre to me, is directly related to environmental mold. So we know mold by itself, it can be an allergen like dust mites can, and here in Richmond, all the pine pollen stuff. And that's just one part of your immune system. Um, then there's the toxic aspect of mold. Mold creates toxins, and so that's a whole different part of your body's system that requires your liver to be working appropriately, requires the appropriate amounts of fats in your body. Stool, you have to have regular stools. You need to be sweating enough, and if you aren't detoxifying appropriately, then the toxins will build up in your system, and that can trigger a different part of your immune system, which is your innate immune system. That's where the SIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome thing, kind of comes into play. When that part of your immune system gets flipped, then you have your innate immune system, which is the more ancient part of your immune system, the more antiquated part that responds to viruses and cancer and mold and parasites and stuff like that. It becomes hyperactive. Um, so when you talk about mold, and then there's mold is a marker for other company. And that was my whole point for previously saying, if you look at SIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, there's a lot of things that can cause it. Breast implant illness is a kind of, vaccinosis, over vaccination, Pfiesteria, ciguatera, red tide. These are natural toxins made by natural things in the environment. A scorpion bite, recluse spider bites. These are all types of things that can trigger this. But 80% of it is a water damaged building, and 80% of that 80% is actinomyces and endotoxins. Actinomyces is a soil-based organism that lives in the soil, and endotoxins, those things I mentioned before, are bacteria, are toxins made by bacteria. So if you talk about mold proper, and if you realize this whole big SIRS, only 16% of it is mold proper. And so all of a sudden, if you're doing a urine mycotoxin test, great, that 18%. And the urine mycotoxin test typically finds toxins related to food you consume. We've known, in great antiquity, you get aflatoxin in wheat and corn. If you ate the moldy corn, you got liver cancer, right, from eating moldy corn, right? That was a direct acute toxicity effect. And you pee that out in your urine. Well, that's where the urine test comes into play, but you're missing, 84% of all this other stuff, sport trap testing that people do, really popular. You get the little thing out there, the little dish, you catch it. What you have to realize is that for every one spore you capture, there are 500 particulates in the air. And so all of a sudden now, if you catch a spore on that plate, there's 500 things for every one little spore on there. So if the plate lights up, it's like, holy moly, you've got a serious problem with a bunch of other stuff. And so you have to really know what the tests are actually looking for. Um, that okay. So I'm going to try to tell as much as I can without getting too off track here. So typically when I'm seeing an individual, I'm trying to categorize, like, is this an allergic issue? Is this a toxic issue? Is this innate inflammatory condition? And the tests you typically do for that are looking at your innate immune system, doing like a C4A, which is a complement test, doing a MSH, it's a brain neurotransmitter your brain makes, looking at your osmolality, looking at your cortisol level, your ACTH, your vasopressin level, um, doing a sample for a thing called Marcons, which is a bacteria that grows in your sinuses that can release toxins to your brain. Um, so the question is really, what are you looking at? I think the problem with mold is that we've used this generic term for mold to apply to many different things. You know, the idea of sick building syndrome. Okay. Well, that is basically your building's so tight that all the off gas, it's the off gassing phenomenon. It's the formaldehyde from the carpets. Well, interesting enough, petroleum products, the very first vaccine adjuvant called Frunze adjuvant was actually a petroleum product. And what we know from the literature is exposure to petroleum over time can induce a vaccine like exposure to you. This is one of the things that happened with the Gulf War syndrome. People are going over there, first Gulf War, and inhaling burning petroleum for a year. And you come back, you're like, the same thing happened in Bagram for the second Gulf War. People are going to Afghanistan and breathing burning tires, burning trash near the bases. And strange enough, one of my patients I was actually discussing this with, pretty high level in the military, certain parts of Afghanistan, they have really high levels of endotoxins in the air related to camel feces. So all of a
Yeah.
sudden, being stationed in a place that has high endotoxins in the air, camel feces, can set you up for this SIRS issue. So I think that one of the biggest things I try to do is educate people what the differences are between these, because um, I think the confusion in the mold world is we're using the same word to describe different phenomena. And SIRS, which is chronic inflammatory response syndrome, is the biggest global term that kind of hits all those. But you have to realize that that is a toxin exposure that you get to a threshold, then that then hits your innate immune system. And symptoms of your innate immune system are things like chronic fatigue, fibro, brain fog, gut issues, hormonal dysregulation, weird body pains, zingers, lightheaded dizziness, dysregulation in your nervous system you see with dysautonomy and POTS, mood regulatory issues, temperature regulatory issues, sensitivity to the environment. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, this all sounds unrelated. And like when you realize these can all be phenomena from this one thing, all of a sudden I'm describing like half the people who walk through my door every day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a little,
I think I checked every one of those as you were going through the
yeah,
list. So, I
yeah.
mean, yeah, and there's a lot of people suffering from it. So, how do you wow, it's got to be hard for you taking it all in, trying to help everyone. What are what's your recommendation? Like old house, new house, just to bring it back to our
You know,
audience. Does it matter? Do you leave after you've had a water event?
well, that's something we struggle with all the time.
Right.
I'm a pragmatic fellow. Half of all buildings in our country have water damage. So if you sell your house and move, you have a 50-50 chance of finding another water damaged building. You know,
Mm,
if you look at what it costs to move, you selling your house is 6%, having someone move the stuff, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden that 40, 50, $60,000 mold remediation is cheaper than moving.
yeah.
And so what I recommend to people is, with the testing, I used to do lots of mold testing. I used to do lots of ERMI testing, which is a type of PCR testing. I used to do, you know, I've done it all under the sun, and what I've kind of come down to is the reality is you need a building biologist, someone whose expertise is coming to your home with an infrared gun and looking at temperature differentials in your wall, around your windows, looking for moisture in your water boards, looking at your air handler, looking at the vents in there, looking at your whole entire house as a ecosystem for where y'all live. Because you can do the testing and find stuff, but then where's the source? You still need someone to come out. And so a building biologist is what I usually do these days over testing
Do we have
because
them here in Midlothian?
we
You
do.
we do? Okay.
Yeah.
Alright, cool. So,
Yeah,
I will definitely
I'm gonna be selfish. I'm not
and
gonna
not
mention them.
recommend? Yeah.
Yeah, because
Okay.
right now they're booked up. I still
Okay.
need them for my patients, so I'm being
Right.
selfish right now. Uh, but
That's okay.
there are one. There's like, well, there's not one. There's they drive to Richmond, but
Okay.
the point is they are out there. You can find them. But I do that almost exclusively now.
Mhm.
Yes, you'll pay $1,500 to $2,000 for your house to be evaluated. I get it's money, but otherwise, you'll spend $400 or $500 on this test or that test, and you'll
Right.
do it again and again, and you won't really find out that your issue is a water leak behind the tile in your bathroom, or you won't find out that that nice tub you put in has a small little leak on the back end, or It's just all these little small things that you won't find out unless someone who's an expert. You want the flashing on your chimney. Some people have issues. It's an issue with grade. The grade to the yard is not away from the house; it's toward the house. So every time it rains, water comes into the crawl space.
Right, right.
And so there's a whole host of things that can cause water damage. And so I just at this stage of my career, um, haven't done this for years and years. I just have a building biologist come out, look at the home, evaluate it, and then find out what needs to be done. And typically the big things are crawl space has to be encapsulated.
Yep.
If you have a crawl space that's not encapsulated, and unfortunately you usually have an air handler in there, and the air handler pulls in everything I mentioned, the crawl space into it. So now the air handler is a source. Um,
Hmm.
so air handlers, crawl space, and then like the big ticket places are usually bathrooms, kitchen, places where water is coming into the home. It's amazing how many people's homes don't have discharge vents, don't have fans in the bathrooms. You have a kitchen with a stove that doesn't have a. People don't realize you get exposed to a lot of particulates cooking food in your kitchen. If you don't have a appropriately powered hood fan on your stove, you're gonna be inhaling a lot of burnt food particles. Dryer in your house. When's the last time you cleaned out the dryer vent? You know, I clean every couple of years. It's amazing. Like if that gets backed up, all of a sudden you're gonna be putting stuff. I had one couple. I couldn't believe this. They actually vented their dryer into their house to help warm it in the wintertime. And I was like, and again, and they had all. It's just you can't make this stuff up. And I've had people that actually had some of these vents, like in the bathrooms, being vented into their attic space,
Mm.
and so
So
and that
you're
was
just
picked up.
creating that environment for mold at that point. That's
That wa
terrible.
and that was picked up by the building biologist who went through the house and was like, why is this being vented in the attic? Why is, sometimes they'll vent stuff into the crawl space.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of stuff you're not going to figure out unless someone who's an expert at comes out and looks at your house.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
I've gone
that's a
through.
great angle to go looking at the building, looking at the source versus trying to do a million different blood tests
Yeah,
because, you get the same results all the time. But if you go into the building, you might find some new information. So that's
yeah.
great.
A lot of times people don't realize, like, carpet. Um, Carpet is toxic. Carpet is horrible. It off gases formaldehyde. It particularizes. I remember reading this about 15 years ago. If you buy a brand new bed
Mhm.
and weigh it 6 months later, it'll weigh 5 more pounds from dust mite feces.
Oh,
Okay, well, your
terrible.
all of your padding in your carpet does the exact same thing. So, do you have a good allergenic cover for your bed, and you have padding carpet in your house? If the answer is yes, you're building up d- dust mite feces. It's kind of disgusting. Um, and we do allergy testing. People almost universally will light up for dust mite, different mite allergens. It's like, well, if you're inhaling the feces, then that's a problem.
Right. So no area rugs in your house then, I'm guessing
No,
from
well, the air rugs that's a different area rug. You get a wool
Okay.
area rug. That's different.
Okay.
But getting a carpet with a padding and the
Yeah.
carpet is almost always some poly. You can get wool rugs.
Okay.
Nice
All
fold down
right.
rugs. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. All right. So at least we can still decorate, but
yeah, yeah. Oh,
just don't do the petroleum.
a carpet and a rug. I mean, you can get a horrible quality rug. I mean, but if you
Right.
just get a nice rug, that's made out of a real material, most of them they're nice are made out of wool, which is it's naturally resistant to a lot of things I'm talking about. But carpets in general are just a bad idea, and it's always in this bedroom areas, right? That
Right.
they put the carpets.
Yeah. Every single one of our bedrooms has a carpet. So we'll have to adjust that.
That was her idea, by
Yeah.
the
It
way.
was very good.
That was you. You were being
Yeah.
cheap.
Um,
Didn't
That's
want to pay for
I like
hardware.
carpet. I like to walk on carpet. I'm sorry.
I
It's
do
com
too. I do too. Like I just wear my little Tiva flip flops around the house now. I'm a big
Yeah.
party pooper for people because they come to me. We have these little conversations like this. This happens all the time, and they ask me questions, and I talk to them. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I wish I could unlearn everything you just told me." I'm like,
Right.
"Sorry,
Yeah.
I feel
sorry."
like to me, this conversation has been like trying to learn kung fu over lunch from a warrior monk. So
Yeah.
it's it's a lot, right? It's
Yeah,
it's great stuff. It's great stuff,
But
but
it
I
is
feel like
drinking
it's
from a fire hose for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I know that you are working on a couple of projects. Is there anything you want to mention so that people can read your book and learn more
Yeah.
about your story?
Well, I'm not sure when this is coming out, but in November of 2025. My book, Uncurable: From Hopeless Diagnosis to Defying All Odds, is coming out. And it's basically my story of my daughter and us interacting with the healthcare system. My website, Richmond Functional Medicine, is I've made it actually for this what you mentioned. It's for the do-it-yourselfer. It's like a do-it-yourselfer's paradise. I've got over 300 blogs. I wrote a series, actually my paper that I have to write for my certification in mold, SIRS actually. I took and created a blog series out of it. It's actually nationally ranked right now on blogs for mold stuff. It's kind of interesting.
That's
But I
great.
wrote it for people and practitioners to walk through, like, what should you look for? And our podcast, Made for Health, myself and Dr. Jinsky, we've done maybe 8 or 10 episodes on these topics. So people can have 8 or 10 hours to their listening pleasure of all things mold. Um, but I've created our website as an educational hub because the reality is that you have to be educated. Um, I've read over 400 books that have like a book reading list on the website. So if you want to learn about this kind of stuff, I've got things there. And for people who want to do more than get educated, want someone to work with them, we're actually in the process of launching a project called Connected Health, which is an online resource. Because the reality is, functional medicine, I haven't taken a new patient in the last year. I'm booked up. Our practice, we're accepting new patients in our practice. Um, but we're the only practice in town doing what we do. Um, and so we're the only practice in Central Virginia doing what we do. So we realize that everybody can't get to us. So we're trying to create an online resource where people, either who don't have the resources or funds, can still get access to this level of care. Because my opinion is that everybody deserves access to this. Whether they utilize it or not is up to them, but they at least deserve access to it. So I'm trying to meet people where they're at and just created all these resources.
Thanks for listening to Virginia Consumer. Everything shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The views expressed are personal opinions based on the individual experiences of our hosts and guests. They do not constitute legal, financial, or medical advice and do not represent the views of any affiliated individuals or organizations. Always do your own research and consult a qualified professional about your specific situation.